Ready for anything, that's the new slogan for the Canon EOS R5C. Now I've got a different one. It's called That Explains It. So basically, yeah, the myth still propagates around the internet, doesn't it? That the EOS R5 had an overheating problem. And if you were following the full story of summer 2020, including the Philip Bloom cat meme that you got extremely upset about, you would have noticed that the EOS R5 had a trick where you could pull the battery out in the middle of an 8K recording after, say, 15 minutes, and the clock would completely reset and it would record for 2 hours in 8K without any overheating problems whatsoever. But it's no secret that the design of the cooling architecture in the body was not exactly very advanced, and Sony made a big play on this with the A7S Mark III, and it's just very ironic, isn't it, that Canon really shot themselves and their reputation in the foot with this overheating excuse of a camera, because now everyone believes it overheats and it can't do what it says it can on the box and all that kind of stuff. It really hurt the brand, and all for just upselling us to this camera 1.5 years later, the That Explains It camera. So yeah, here we go again. The EOS R5C has a fan, but they take away the in-body stabilization. Now there's got to be a lot of excuses around from the various websites like DP Review for that, saying that, oh, they took it off to aid the cooling of the sensor and all that kind of stuff, or it doesn't interact well with gimbals, that kind of thing. I don't really buy it, to be honest. I think that's mainly to make you go out and buy both cameras if you want stills and IBIS, and then this camera for video. Now, as a hybrid camera, it's got a very strange design of the selector switch. I don't know if you noticed, but off is in the middle between stills on one side and video. So in order to swap from video to stills and maintain the same exposure settings for the same shot in that same moment, so you got to quickly grab the shot, you have to turn the camera off and reboot. So that's going to be interesting. It remains to be seen how that operates in reality, but it's a very odd design. So Canon RAW, let's face it, it's not a very good codec. I think Blackmagic RAW is by far the better choice, especially if you're editing in Resolve. And let's not even go there when it comes to Adobe. I mean, the performance of any RAW codec in Premiere leaves a lot to be desired. Now, if you're going to be bumping up Canon RAW to 8K at 60 frames a second, I really don't know how you're going to edit that, to be honest. So, yeah, it's been 10 years since the EOS R5C with the beautiful cinema badge. 10 years though, and that's a long time. Now you can pick it up for $2,000 on eBay, whereas previously it cost you $15,000 and then $12,000 when it first came out, which is completely insane for a 1DX and a firmware update. So at least this time we get a fan. And yeah, the headline specs though, let's get on to the good stuff. I mean, the headline specs are headline grabbing, but 8K 60 frames a second, I don't need it. 8K RAW, can't edit it. 4K 120 frames a second is pixel binned. On the A7S Mark III it isn't. 45 megapixels, don't need it. Not that great in low light, and I think the low light performance of the S1H in 6K is a lot better. And difference between 6K and 8K is very minimal, really. Creatively speaking, zero difference. The price, $4,500, is a bit cheaper than I was expecting. I thought Canon would be tempted to really gouge cinematographers and videographers. You do get paid a lot more for doing both jobs, stills and video, so the price of professional video equipment is always going to be higher than that for just photographers. But yeah, just $600 more than the original EOS R5. So maybe that's Canon apologising for you wasting $4,000 on that camera, and it now being completely useless and superseded by this just over a year later. I hope you sold your Canon EOS R5s, guys, because you bought them for video, completely useless now. But at least you got IBIS. That's something. We could see a PS5 type situation here where you can't really buy one anyway, so maybe do hold on to your R5 original version with your overheating problem, because you'll likely be paying $6,000 on eBay for a good 2 years. Canon, with the chip shortage, are just not going to be able to make that many of these cameras, and I'm sure the R5 will be prioritised in production. So there's no ProRes and no full-size HDMI port. Now this is a usability disaster, to be quite frank. The Nikon Z9 has ProRes. The Panasonic GH6 will likely have ProRes, and internal recording is important for me. I don't really like hooking up lots of riggy stuff. Fuji X-H2 might have ProRes, so yeah, the R5C, considering it's aimed at videographers, is looking a bit lonely in terms of the internal codec options. The micro HDMI port, what were they thinking there? All the video orientated hybrid cameras have a full-size chunky HDMI port on them, like the S1H and Sony A7S Mark III. My choice would be to go for the S1H. It's cheaper, it's got anamorphic mode. Canon continue to ignore anamorphic shooters for some reason. It's got a much bigger and better EVF, better for manual focus lenses. The autofocus issue, yeah, I mean, if you really need autofocus and you're more of a videographer and a wedding photographer, then maybe the A7S Mark III is the way to go, because autofocus is quite important for a lot of people, and the S1H doesn't really compete that well in that area. But for everything else, absolutely perfect. So save the money and get that. Speaking of lenses, I think the whole reason the EOS R5C exists is to sell RF lenses. This is where the big money is for Canon. They're more a lens company than they are a camera company in some ways. So it's very important that they cover all the bases and really establish RF lenses for lots of different users. And that's where this camera comes in. It's all about just moving on from EF mount, really. But for ethical reasons, I can't support Canon, and I won't be buying any RF lenses. They're a big investment, and I'm really just so happy with what Sigma is doing for E-mount and L-mount. There's no way I'm going to flog my 35 f1.2 from Sigma or my 24 to 72.8 from Sigma for mirrorless cameras. They're superb lenses, and I'd much rather support a family-run business in Sigma than a corporation like Canon who has lied to me in the past. So yeah, creatively I don't feel that the unique headline grabbing specs like 8K and 60p, raw codec light, uneditable trash, I can't get behind it, I don't need it, and I won't be spending this money on the camera. I do need IBIS. It's very disappointing that it took it off. I'm a bit concerned about the weather sealing with the big vent on it. Certainly lets in a lot of air. Will it let in the weather as well? That's the question. I'd say if you're interested in the creative possibilities of RAW, then I really do think that the Nikon Z9 is interesting, and Blackmagic RAW will get you 100% of the way there creatively and be editable in Resolve. So yeah, and the S1H of course shoots Blackmagic RAW externally, I'm sure the GH6 is going to be interesting in that regard. Granted though, Canon has come a long way since the XC10, haven't they, in this product category. There's really only been 2 other attempts in the past to corner the hybrid market, and that was the 1DC and the XC10. Those were specifically for video stills hybrid users. Canon has only now realised how big that market is and come out with the right product for it. But it's a product I just can't get behind and I don't need. So for that reason, EOS R5C, you're fired.